I'm so glad that we are starting this season with Eddie Jones. We have an amazing lineup of speakers for this new 24-25 season with people from all over the country, and actually people from other countries. But I have a soft spot for the architecture and for architects from Arizona, where Eddie started Jones Studio back in 1979. Some of you might know that I have spent time working in Arizona, and that's when I had the chance to learn about the place. What I can tell you is that it wasn't love at first sight for me. Arizona felt different. It felt harsh. It felt difficult to read. It was only after many trips and after being there for a while that I started to understand the land and all the nuance in the landscape, the nuance in the light throughout the day and in the different seasons, or some locals say, the romance of the desert. Arizona was an acquired taste for me, but I eventually learned to love it. I believe that Eddie Jones architecture understands and captures the nuance of the place, the play of light and shadow, the colors, the transitions, the in-between spaces, and it does so with a beautiful balance between the poetic and the pragmatic, between the idea and the program, leaning on craft and on an economy of means to create architecture that is at once local and universal. In that sense, Eddie belongs in the same lineage as his peers Rick Joy, Wendell Burnett, Will Bruder, and all the way back to Frank Lloyd Wright and Taliesin West. Please join me in welcoming Eddie Jones.
Well, that was a wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it, and I'm very honored and privileged to have been invited to speak at the forum. You know, as Nate said, I've been watching the YouTube channel for years and seeing that logo, you know, the first thing. And so tonight when I walked in and I saw it on the screen, I was very flattered. So anyway, thank you for coming. I'll try to end on time. And years ago, I was in a bookstore in Arizona, and I found a book, and the title was simply Time. And it was a book that Andy Goldsworthy had put together. I'm sure you guys have probably heard of Andy Goldsworthy, British artist. And it made me realize the inevitability and seriousness and necessity of the passage of time and its relationship to the forces of nature. For example, you know, Goldsworthy has this ability to walk out into nature and just sense what's available to build with. In this case, he waited for low tide. He gathered stones and he built this series of arches. And then he stepped back and the tide started coming back in. And it came in and it changed the structure, and then it receded. And although the structure had been transformed, it left a mark. The man that used to own the Dallas Observer, who owned the Village Voice and the Phoenix New Times and several other alternative weekly newspapers around the country, his name was Michael Lacey. And he commissioned a house in Paradise Valley. And because he was an investigative reporter and a journalist and a writer, he said to me, "Eddie, I want a house of mud and shadow." He didn't say, "I want a kitchen and a living room and a bath." He said, "I want a house of mud and shadow." And so rammed earth seemed to be the most appropriate material. Now, this compacted dirt home received the first building permit in the history of Paradise Valley. I also received the first building permit in the history of Phoenix for rammed earth and Scottsdale. And if you think it's hard to get a regular building permit. Wait till you try to get one for this. Anyway, the rammed earth walls are absolutely beautiful. They will also last 1,000 years. There are examples all over the planet. And in Arizona, I had been taught that the last material that you want to use in the Sonoran Desert is wood, because that desert light, that desert heat will eat your house in a matter of a couple of years. But Goldsworthy, shows us that he goes out into the wilderness, he gathers his building material within a pretty, short radius, and he builds a structure, and then he leaves, and an entire season goes by until Earth swallows his work. And I just find that so beautiful. The durability of stone was, the structure was wiped out within an 8-hour tidal movement, but it left a mark. This took an entire season, but it disappeared. So naturally, on the House of Mud and Shadow, I needed to introduce a material that was the opposite of the durability of rammed earth. So I decided I am going to clad this house, the rest of this house, in wood. And I cantilever it unsupported, so it starts to twist and warp and split and change color as quickly as possible. And when we clad this wall with wood, I knew what was going to happen next. It was going to start shrinking. And I was fine with relinquishing my pencil. I encouraged Mother Nature, you take over. It is yours now. You design the light patterns in this space. And she did, and they're absolutely beautiful. Another example, again, using rammed earth, but for completely different reasons. This happens to be a 30,000 square foot private home museum, which you guys know all about. I saw plenty today, dime a dozen. They're not that frequent in Arizona. But what's unique about this house that's different from your rich people is this 30,000 square foot house has a 1-car garage. You can see it back there, and it has 1 bedroom. And the collection, it is a magnificent collection. It's world class, and most of it are artifacts that were discovered below the ground. And so this 30,000 square foot house had to fit into a regular neighborhood in Paradise Valley. So I immediately started to think I need to just recess it into the ground. And the artifacts were discovered below grade anyway, so let's put them back underground. So when you excavate a hole that's the length of a football field and 65 feet wide, you're going to have a mountain of dirt. Rather than throwing it away, we built 4-foot thick rammed earth retaining walls. So as you descend into this below ground, underground space to experience these artifacts, you have that fragrance of the dirt, you have the change in acoustics and lighting levels, and it prepares you for the experience of the collection. And even though these spaces are beyond human scale. I mean, who needs a 20,000 square foot room to live in? I still try to make these places of intimacy. And then at the end of the day, Ron and Maxine get in their glass cylindrical elevator and they ascend into the air to where they live above their private museum. Now, what you're looking at here is a bicycle mechanic stacking 1/4-inch glass that he and his other buddy, bicycle mechanic, had spent the last few months cutting. Now, the reason the bicycle mechanics are doing it is because none of the professional glazing contractors wanted to touch this wall. And they spent, you're only seeing half of it, the other half is below that glass floor. It is so beautiful. Can you imagine, you probably have medicine cabinets with glass shelves and you see the green edge. That is telling you about the iron content that is within the clear glass. And you only see it once, you create density by turning it on its edge. And that's backlit by the south sun. And I don't even think the photograph does it justice. Another project, this one's in North Scottsdale. Mr. Kofke, you like Scottsdale. It was a beautiful site. It's, as an architect, I don't know, maybe you share this with me, that you have mixed feelings about being shown a beautiful site, and what's going to happen next when you begin to build a house on it, build a structure, build a building. You're going to be destructive. By definition, you're destructive. So many times the shapes of the architecture that I create is based on getting out of the way of the beauty of the site. And this very unusual curvilinear house was a result of avoiding the boulder piles, avoiding the 200-year-old stand of saguaros, and trying to keep as much intact as possible, even the natural drainage patterns. And it was a great experience. And it was all to capture these views towards the city lights. And it's built around this hemispherical swimming pool. You should have seen the formwork to build half a sphere. It was beautiful in itself. And the pool overflows. It's stainless steel coping. And there are 740 stainless steel nipples around this coping that turns the waterfall into these rivulets of diamonds once the sun hits it. Back in Oklahoma, had a couple who commissioned this house on 40 acres. And when you're on 40 acres, you can reach out in all four compass directions. It's called the Prairie Raptor, and it was in response to the Prairie House by Herb Green in Norman, Oklahoma. I removed the slide from this in order to, reduce my amount of time of speaking. But for those that it is an extraordinary piece of architecture. In the roof, these are 20-foot long 2x12 board shingles that are more like feathers than they are roofing. And it's very axial. And inside the spaces, the programmed spaces radiate from a central entry point. And that central entry point is called the jungle. And this photograph was taken soon after they moved in, so this jungle really is a jungle now. It is overgrown. And for you architects in the audience, you're looking at that illegal spiral stair, and you're probably asking yourself, how did you get away with that? Well, I told the inspector that it's not a stair, it's a play structure for the African serval cats. These are 40-pound cats because it's illegal if they're over 40 pounds, so you just say 40 pounds. They had 3 of them. And they used this loft as a defensible high point. They could see everything that was going on in the house, who was coming and going when all the fresh meat arrived. What I didn't tell you is this couple owned one of the last family-owned pharmaceutical companies in America, and they have since sold it, so there are no more small family-owned mom-and-pop pharmaceutical companies. This skylight that's above the loft where the cats live, not to mention the owners, that ring of beautiful, those soap bubbles that you see hanging there. Warren, they own this pharmaceutical company, and they had pallets of these beautiful glass vials, the same glass vials your COVID vaccine came in. And I'm seeing these, and it's the best glass you can buy, and it's like, I have to use these. And he said, do whatever you want. So we strung them together, and what it does, and this is Bruce Goff's influence on me. I don't know how many of you know the Price Studio in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, but Goff suspended shredded visqueen. And I asked him why he did that. He goes, I needed something for the light to cling to get deeper into the space. And that's exactly what this is doing. Now, I think Nate mentioned that I have a project in Arlington, Texas. It's Eureka. 1995, we finished it. It's a nature center in River Legacy Parks. And we interviewed for the job. It went great. My brother, Neil Jones, and he's my partner, my business partner. That's the only reason I'm still in business, because I actually have a business partner. And he built it. And so we went to exploring the woods surrounding this site, and we discovered this children's fort. It's just like the twig dome that Goldsworthy did. The children, without any preconceptions, gathered their material within a narrow radius, and they built a shelter. And then the next time we went back, it had disappeared, which to me is the definition of sustainable architecture. On the plane coming back, I did this sketch on the cocktail napkin, and then we built it. Now, it's very rare that the image of an inspirational children's fort can turn into a sketch and turn into a building, but this time it did. And it's I went back for the 20-year anniversary, I think a year or two ago. This is 95, well, it was longer than that, I guess. And the children, the first students at this nature center, some of them have become teachers, and it was very gratifying. I hope you have a chance to go see it. It's one of those buildings that enjoys getting older and enjoys nature, showing the passage of time. Those tree columns came from the Ranger ballpark when they were widening the road. We had the contractor push them down, and we were able to cull and shortlist what we thought were the best trees for the job. Now, that was 95. A few years ago, the Nature Center led us to the developer who did Viridian in Arlington. And he was able to get that kind of density. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Viridian, but it's a huge, subdivision. And he had to promise to do a cultural center, some amenity in order to get approval for the density. Bird's Fort, you probably never heard of it, I hadn't either, was on this piece of property in the middle of the Viridian development on Lake Galloway. And it's important because this is where the treaty was signed, the Bird's Fort Treaty was signed that made Tarrant County possible. And so the remains of the fort were long gone, but they knew where it had existed. Across the street to the south, all of these tract houses were built. All these suburban homes were built. And here was this natural wilderness right across the street. And in the history of Bird's Fort and the violence, that was part of it, and the hope and optimism that was part of it, really told a compelling story. And it was a stockade. The fort was a stockade, the pointed wooden poles with blockhouses on all the corners for defense. And I couldn't bring myself to impose a conventional architecture on what I began calling the sacred ground. So you see that stockade, is very conventional. You see the blockhouse on this corner. As it moves towards the sacred ground, it starts to change. It starts to morph under the pressure of the memory of ghosts. And you can see in this rendering, you can see from the street that the stockade wall is starting to change. But it starts out very conventionally, and then people will move into the interior and begin to be educated through the history. They can move up to the roof as an event space. You can even get married at the chapel that's on the water. And I'm hoping that this is the year we finally get to develop the schematic design and get it built. We also do performing arts centers, another very rewarding building type. This was for South Mountain Community College, one of the more underserved neighborhoods in the Phoenix area. The people were very proud of their kids that had enrolled in the community college and were part of the music program. And not unlike a violin, where all the shapes and curves and convex and concave shapes contribute to making a beautiful sound. And that's how we design the interior. Every one of those curved panels of eucalyptus, they're not arbitrary. They're calculated to reflect sound to every one of those seats. And the Phoenix Symphony string section uses this auditorium to practice because the acoustics are so good. Now, just like a violin has to be placed in a case in order to be protected, this sound machine inside this building had to be protected too. Now, the cladding is just sort of standard eave flashing sections that we attached. Why? Well, not unlike the saguaro cactus. The needles on the saguaro cactus, you're probably thinking, well, that's just to protect the cactus from the critters, which they are, but they're also dissipating heat because air can move around all the surfaces, just like it can on these cantilevered ledges and dissipate heat. And then as a result, at night, when the parents come for the recitals, the building lights up like a beacon. So that's the auditorium, curvilinear eucalyptus. The next Performing Arts Center we did, same program, but this time we handled the acoustics with regular concrete block. And each projection of the block is calculated to reflect sound back down to all of the seats. And again, it is a very excellent acoustical house. From the outside, it looks like this. And on the left is the new auditorium that we built. On the right is the existing Harkins Theater that we started with. We polled the faculty and asking them, what's your favorite piece of music? Now that took a while to get consensus, but we finally did, and it was Rhapsody in Blue. And if you're familiar with that tune, there's a clarinet that just zooms up, and that's represented by the block patterns on the left. And then the music levels out. Now those red things cantilevered off the building are actually salvaged chair stanchions from the old Harkins Theater. And we had them powder coated and cantilevered off the building. And those are the notes. They travel all the way around the building. And if you can read music, then you can guess the secret of the building. Now we're going to get a little more serious for just a little bit. As was mentioned, we have, and I will call it a privilege, certainly the good fortune, to be one of the architects that the General Services Administration trusts to do land ports of entry. You have seaports, airports, and land ports of entry. If you live along the southern part of the United States, the southern border, you will know that it's very contentious. Almost to the point that people forget that there's a northern border too. It's actually the longest country-to-country border in the world. The Canadian-United States border is the longest in the world. And has 3 times as many land ports of entry as the southern port. Recognize this, the Great Wall of China. It happens to be the same length as that Canadian border, by the way. And if you stare at this photograph long enough, it's just fascinating. Just follow the wall and keep following it, and you have to really look close, but it just goes on and on and on and on. It's a magnificent wall, and it was built to keep the Mongolians out of China 3,000 years ago, and it didn't work. You know where I'm going with this. I think it's beautiful. And why? Because it's following the ridge, and so the water, drains from either side of the wall, which allows the vegetation to hug the wall. Unlike our border fence, which gets so much attention, which is running perpendicular to the ridges. And but again, if you take away the politics, there's something certainly compelling about this image. Christo did the running fence up in Northern California. It reminds me of that. So here we have this political hot potato called a border fence. And then you have artists like Ron Riel. I don't know if you're familiar with his name, but he's someone you should have lecture. He's brilliant. And without asking permission, he and his crew built these beautiful hot pink teeter-totters. And outside of El Paso, they load them in the pickup truck. They arrive at the border, and they've practiced, and they insert them between the slats in the fence. They find the fulcrum. They set the teeter-totters. They step back, and what happens next? The children on the United States side come over. The children on the Juarez side come over, and they start playing. And they're kids, yet they know that unless they cooperate with one another, this isn't going to work. Isn't that brilliant? And after 45 minutes, they got bored and left, and the Border Patrol's there by now, and they're standing around scratching their heads, and Ron and his crew just picked them up and took them away, and that was that. But I love that Ron's able to poke the bull without pissing people off, unlike myself. But the thing that guided us on our first land port of entry, I'm going to show you Mariposa. It was our first one. We were hired in 2008. We had no experience with anything remotely like a gateway to America. We had not even designed ticket booths at an amusement park, much less inspection booths. But there was a poet, the poet laureate of Arizona, Alberto Rios. He wrote this poem, and I'll just read the bottom line. Together, let us turn the map until we see clearly the border is what joins us, not what separates us. Very simple sentence, very simple notion, but it means everything. It establishes one's attitude. Now, if you think the border separates us, you're going to design a certain kind of port of entry. If you think the border connects us, then you're going to do something else, perhaps more compassionate and respectful. So, Nogales, Arizona, you can see it's up there. This is, the Gulf of Mexico down here. And it's just south of Tucson, straight south of Tucson. It's harsh. Phoenix is lush compared to Nogales. It gets less than 4 inches of rain a year. It used to get less than 4 inches of rain a year. It gets less now. And this is what we found when we arrived. Oh, it's 2006, excuse me. And these ports, most of the ports along the southern border were built in the early 70s. And they worked fine. They worked for a long time, but the traffic, once the NAFTA treaties were signed, commercial trucking more than tripled. People going back and forth increased. Security protocols started to increase, and these ports were really struggling to keep up with technology and the stress or the lack of capacity when you're overstressed. And so we completely reorganized it. We literally rebuilt the port, and we built it into zones, completely separating the operations. People heading south going to Mexico, pink, people heading north going in private vehicles going to the United States. Far right, the blue represents commercial trucking. And you'll notice how the buildings create this central zone that is green. And that we call the oasis. Rather than depending on barbed wire and razor wire to secure enforcement zones, we use the architecture. And so I thought, how can we welcome people to America? How can we represent the dignity of the United States government? And how can we lower the anxiety levels of people coming in and having to be inspected and processed? Well, you rely on nature. You give them a garden. How are you going to irrigate such a huge 54-acre site? All the water that lands on our roofs, all the water that lands in the parking lots, all of the water is carefully channeled and filtered and piped to an underground system. And you see one of the major scuppers over here. When I say it rains 4 inches a year, that's usually all at once. And people, they don't understand. They go, Eddie, why are you going to all this trouble of harvesting rainwater? It doesn't rain. I go, correction, it rains infrequently, and when it rains, it pours. And that we have a 1 million gallon underground storage tank. The first monsoon filled it up, and it's never been empty since. And as a result, we get a garden. And it's a beautiful place, a place of respite. It's safe, it's clean, the air is clean. Because of the new circulation patterns, more efficient circulation patterns, there's less of wait time, less idling. Anxiety levels are dropping down. Now everybody's safer. And the best part is it's a gateway to the United States that we can be proud of. And when they go in, when the pedestrians enter the pedestrian processing lobby, they're surrounded by nature. One of the requirements for the architecture is that it be transparent, because the officers want to be able to see what's going on outside. They call it eyes on the port. Great. That means everybody else has eyes on the port too and can enjoy the garden. This is what we started with. It was appalling. Pedestrians and cars mixing to cross the border. Now, for any students in the audience, this is a great example of why it's necessary that you endure the gauntlet of your architectural education and stick with it, because someday you will get to see this turn into this. And it's a great feeling. The bar was set low, so it was kind of easy to improve things, but it still feels very good. And that's a photograph taken from Mexico. You can see the border fence in the foreground. And the red, white, and blue is in a spectrum, and it's telling the cars they go to the red lanes, pedestrian goes to the white lanes, blue is commercial. Then we get to do it again. We're frankly, we're on our 7th port. Again, this is to the architects and students in the audience. Thoughtful design, good design, it counts and people notice. And so we keep getting hired to do these huge jobs because they work. It's like everybody wins, and the taxpayer money that goes into these returns on the investment. Now, San Luis is in the southwestern corner of Arizona, which was underwater millions of years ago, and it's mostly sand. But all of that green that you see, that is the edge of the Imperial Valley. 95% of the leafy green produce that's consumed is coming from the Imperial Valley. Now, how do you get all of these vegetables growing in such an arid region? The Colorado River. That's the squiggly line coming down. It's on its way to the Sea of Cortez. It never gets there because all the water is pulled off to irrigate these crops. There's hundreds of thousands of acres of crops. Somebody has to plant it, maintain it, and harvest it. Yuma doesn't have the labor force. Little San Luis certainly doesn't have the labor force, but San Luis, Rio Colorado on the Mexico side does. The migrant workers were waiting in line 3 to 4 hours to cross the border every morning to go work the fields, then getting back home late. And to the credit of our government, that was unacceptable. And so we were hired to redesign the pedestrian processing building, because after waiting hours, this was the space they went into and to be questioned and inspected. So here again, when you're an architect, you get to do things like this. You get to take this and turn it into this. And you'll notice the sawtooth ceiling is very linear. It's a wayfinding device. And it's inspired by the crops themselves. You can see the crop in the lower left-hand corner. The water is reflecting the sky. If you invert that diagram, you get the section above, and then those little irrigation canals become skylights. And it's expressed on the exterior of the building, as you can see. How am I doing, Nate? Okay. Because this is the last project. I wanted to show my studio, and I wanted to give credit to the amazing group of people that have decided that working at Jones Studio was a good idea. This aerial is Tempe, Arizona. It's right next to Phoenix and Scottsdale. You can't tell when you leave one and arrive at the other. The university, Arizona State University, is over to the right. You see the football stadium over there, A Mountain, and that water feature that you see, that's Tempe Town Lake. The council decided, it'd be a good idea to dam the Salt River and create a town lake, and it was a good idea. It happens to be where the early Hohokam dug their canal systems, hand dug the canal systems, and I wonder if you know this, that the Phoenix metro area has more lineal miles of canal than Venice and Amsterdam combined. And it's a fraction of what you see on the screen. But our office is at the point where the major point of diversion of the water. And this was taken just right after we moved in. Those mesquite trees are huge now. The parking lot is gravel. It's shaded by these beautiful trees. You don't see asphalt. You don't see painted stripes. We use this for gatherings. We empty it of cars, and we can hold events out here. The rammed earth permit was easier than getting a permit for this block wall. You know, had to cheat a little bit on that one. And inside, you can see our sunken conference room. Although we're in a neighborhood that's, I call it the last ghetto of Tempe, we live and work inside this garden. We're surrounded by nature. Again, it's irrigated from water that hits our roof, and we store it underground. We call this the family table. We all work at the same desks, so to speak. And I think that's the probably a reason behind, you know, most of our success. And there they are, you know. I love them. They're a family. It's the Jones Studio family. And I have, you know, Neil, you can see my hands on Neil's shoulder. He's the one in the suit and tie, of course. And the rest of the motley crew isn't. And then to my left in the blue shirt is Jacob Benny. He's our young partner. And to right of Neil is Brian Farling, who's our partner too. And they will be taking over Jones Studio one of these days. And they're very gifted people. All of these young people are gifted. And if you ever get to Tempe, the door's always open. You're welcome to come over and visit. There's nothing I like better to do than talk about architecture, just like I am now. So thank you. I've been asked to talk about the influence of Bruce Goff, which I am happy to do. I did meet him before he passed away. Neil, my brother, and I drove to Tyler, Texas on a Christmas break and knocked on his door, and he answered, and we spent the entire day together. But I don't know how much you've studied Goff, but I grew up. The first book I ever bought was on Frank Lloyd Wright, and maybe the third book I bought was on Bruce Goff, and subsequently I've become very good friends with Herb Green, which was Goff's protege, and the short answer is, whenever I am troubled, whenever I'm challenged by a difficult situation, whether it's some controversial thing in the community or my clients being difficult and stubborn and wanting to not do this but do that, I think of Bruce Goff and I say to myself, Eddie, don't stop. Bruce would have figured it out and he would have done something even better. And that has carried me a long way. Thank you. Another question? I thought I would get some questions relative to border politics and working for the GSA. I can't believe I'm saying it, but the GSA, General Services Administration, is the largest landlord in the world. They manage all federal property, and it's a behemoth, as you would guess. And so how do we accomplish design excellence and work with the GSA at the same time? Well, it's frankly easy because they have what's called the Design Excellence Program, and it was created by Senator Patrick Moynihan, and it mandates that you do your best. You have to bring your A game every time, and they have your back. CBP, Customs and Border Protection, when we first started working with them, they don't want to talk about filtering light and embossing footprints in the concrete and things like that, or especially landscaping. And but GSA always had our back, and to the point where we could complete these projects and CBP could say, oh, we get it now. and the visitors crossing the border, oh, we get it now. And so to the point I want to make is they are our best and most progressive client. This San Luis that you saw, we're in the process of building the entire port now. It will be the first net zero land port of entry in the world. I got one more question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Yeah. Heck yes. Are you an acoustical engineer? Okay. You're crazy if you don't work with an acoustical engineer when you're doing a performance hall. And we love our acoustical engineer. And this may surprise you. The first one with the undulating eucalyptus walls, we didn't use a computer. We built, at the direction of the acoustical engineer, we built like a 1 inch equals a foot scale model of that hall. And we, put in this flexible material and covered it with mirrored mylar. And then we laid out the seats. And then we took a laser pointer and we would put it in the seat and we would aim it at the wall. And then we would tweak the curves until there was that reflection, worked at every single seat. And then the next one we did with the concrete block, that was more sophisticated. We actually had software to do that. But, I love surrounding myself with the best people, the best structural engineers, the best acoustical engineers, mechanical, electrical. You have to have a team that's all on the same page. And these land ports of entry, you have to have a general contractor that's on the same page. And what's the page look like? The page is this goal that's bigger than any of us. And it's more important than any single agenda. And when you have that kind of cooperation, it's a powerful thing, and it really makes it fun. I was telling a young man out in the lobby, that I love being an architect. I haven't worked since I got out of college. It's been that much. Now, if you were to ask Neil, my partner, he may have a different attitude on that. Well, thank you. I appreciate. Yes, sir. What was the most defining moment in the Jones Studio history? What changed everything? Interesting question, because when a significant commission happens or recognition, whatever it is, happens, you think this is it, and then years go by and something else happened and go, no, this was it. And so the most recent thing was the Mariposa Land Port of Entry. We grew up, we had to, because it was a huge responsibility. And we were the most inexperienced people on the team, and we had to catch up. And but we did. It damn near killed us, but we did, and that really changed everything. Thank you for asking. So I'm getting the sign that we have to conclude tonight. Thank you very much. You've been wonderful.